Hello everyone. So I am going to demonstrate the labeling and leader lines process that I talked about in class yesterday. Just to rehash, this is an example of it's a piece I did for Ohio State University. This is on the right is kind of where the labels and leader lines were requested. And this is where I ended up putting them. If you can see the difference between them, that the labels on the left hand side are not over top of the figure, and that the leader line, they're properly spaced, and that the leader lines all come right off the bottom of the lettering and go straight across to what they're identifying. It takes a little bit of fiddling around to get them all lined up and still be able to identify everything you need to identify and get the spacing right, but it's definitely worth the effort as it really adds to your illustration. It highlights your illustration while still making the labels and leader lines quite usable, but it also takes the attention away from them back onto your artwork, which is, kind of cool and what it's all about. So what I'm going to do is add some labels to this urinary system piece. And the way I'm going to do that, so this is the urinary system. This is in Photoshop, and I am going to open Adobe Illustrator. And I should have done that ahead of time. It'll take just a second. Alright, so this is Adobe Illustrator, and what you're going to do is don't create a new document. Just go to Open, and then find that piece in Photoshop. So here it is, urinary system, no background. And I'm going to open that piece. And what that's going to do, it's going to give me a document in Adobe Illustrator that is exactly the same size as the document that I'm using in Photoshop, which you'll see in a few minutes is going to be important for us. And I'm going to add a new, so I locked my illustration. I'm going to add a new layer, and I'm just going to go in with the type tool, and I'm going to put in some labels. Caps locks. Let's try it again. Kidney. There we go. That was tough. And use a pretty standard typeface for labels. Arial, Helvetica. This is Myriad Pro. You again don't want the font to become the focus of the piece, and also consider the scaling of something. This illustration happened to have been a full page illustration, so 12 point type is more than big enough. I'd probably actually come down to 10 for labels. But if I were going to pardon me, if I were going to be reducing this down to 50% or smaller, I would probably want the font, quite a bit bigger. So when I reduce that down to half, we'll say I took it down 50%. If I went, around 20, that would get me close to a 10-point size when it doesn't exactly work like that, but it would get me close to a 10-point size when I take it down to scale. So anyhow, I'm just going to go with a nice small size for the labels, because this is again a full page illustration. You wouldn't want the labels gigantic and sticking off of there. So okay, let's zoom in on this. So here's our kidney label. I really enjoy this illustration, sorry. So we're just going to make a straight line labeling our kidney. Add no stroke weight on it. And I'm going to put half a point on this. All right, there's basically my line and what I need to do. What I want to do with this line is I want to line it up exactly with the bottom of this type. And if you have smart guides on, you're going to need to turn them off because it's going to try to line it up like here where the baseline is. Or maybe it's, yeah, I think it's there. But line it up exactly with the bottom of the type, and then hold shift and then move it off the side just a little bit. So there's where I want my leader line for that. And then what you can do is you can come back, and if you're in the appearance panel, here's that stroke. You can turn it on and off over here. I'm going to add a layer, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a stroke to the stroke, and I'm going to make it white. Alright, so there's my white stroke, and I'm going to just take the size up. If you can see, it kind of, right there it is, it's kind of increasing and engulfing that black line. The black, because it's on top over here in the layers, will still show up on top, but I'm just going to put, so that was a 1/2 point. I'm going to put we'll put a 2 point on there. You could probably go 1.5, and then so that's what it looks like right now. And what that does is it breaks up this line of the kidney so we don't get a kind of a focal spot where they make a X right there where they cross. What was I going to do with that? Oh, so here I also like to go in here and come down here to stroke and put a rounded end cap on it, and then that looks a little bit nicer. You see, if we take the end cap off, what we get. All right, and we'll put the end cap back on. And that makes it a little nicer. Then, excuse me, what I'm going to do is I'm going to, let's put a few more labels on here. Caps locks, bane of existence. Irider. And you only need to capitalize the first the first word in there. And I would label it artery. Also acceptable is just an A with a period. That means artery. If you ever see 2 A's with a period, that's plural, arteries. So there's our artery. Excuse me. I'm going to pause this just a second. Okay, so here's our art. Here are the labels. We need to get these labels into Photoshop. If I turn this layer off and I go into Photoshop and I say File, Place Linked, and I choose, these are my AI labels, it dumps it right in the middle, which is not at all what we want. We want the, I mean, you can then take and adjust these, and that's totally fine. You can do that. That's quick and easy. And if you need to go back here and you change, say we named this wrong. We didn't, but and I go back to Photoshop, and you'll see it automatically updated. It jogged it around just a little bit. That's what we want. Another option, though, that I was going to get to is, let's change this back. And we need to get the exact size of this document. So if I go to my artboard, double click, 612 by 792 points. I say okay. Come back out here. I'm going to take a rectangle, 612 by 792 points, and say okay. I'm going to place this. I want my x coordinate at 0, my y coordinate at 0. That'll put it exactly where I want it. And I'm going to switch these. And the stroke, I'm going to put just the smallest stroke on there, 0.25. I tried it with, let's try it with this, and then we'll take the stroke off and see if it works still. I can't remember exactly. So anyhow, let's save this. Go into Photoshop, and there it auto-updated. Actually, let me get rid of that because it updated us based on where it was. If we say File, Place Linked, and here's my labels, I say OK. It should place it exactly where I want it. Alright, now let's try an experiment. If I go back into Illustrator and I put no stroke on that box and I save it again, and I go to Photoshop and I tell it to update content, it stays where it's at, but it gets rid of that stroke. The reason to get rid of that stroke is I've left the stroke on before, and the final illustration can have a tiny little stroke around the outside edge that you can't see because of this black background, but your client will definitely see it. So don't leave that black box in there. But that's a way to get your labels into Photoshop. And again, the reason that we do it this way is so let's turn this back on. Let's add an extra label in here. So say we needed to change something. I wanted this as the kidney right here, and I'm going to have this one. I'm going to change this to, we're going to show the renal pelvis, which is that item right there. There, and we're going to mark the kidney. Excuse me. There's our kidney, and this is a renal pelvis. All right, now it's going to say save. We'll save that. So the client came back and they wanted us to add a label. Now we go back into Photoshop, and it added the label and it automatically updated it for us off of that save. So it takes a few seconds to set up, but it's definitely worth it when you want to make changes, especially if you have like you know, dozens of labels. You won't have that, but say you have well, you might have a dozen labels. So anyhow, it's just a lot easier to update that way. And I find that the line tools, as far as this goes, making that double outline, and the type tools in Illustrator are a lot easier to use. The important thing is to make sure that you keep the AI file and the Photoshop file in the same folder, just so you don't lose them. Okay, one thing I wanted to add to that is if you need to, for whatever reason, you need to have these your labels at an angle. Let's see, let me take that object. I'm going to lock that selection. That you need to have these at an angle. You can do that. For whatever reason you need to do that. You can put them at an angle. It's important to have them so they're all at the same angle. And while I just grab those and drug them down, you'll see that if I pick this one up, and they're not at actually the exact same angle. So what I will do often then is I will just take kind of the longest one, and I will drag it down. It's not in the right spot yet, so let's get rid of these. And again, some of this stuff takes a little extra setup, but you know, I think it's just definitely so worth it to have a really good looking piece. And that I need to be a little higher. Then what we're going to do is I'm going to come in here and I'm going to say P+, so I'm going to add a point. Here's where I want it to point to. Here's where I want it to point to. Here's where I want it to point to. choose my open arrow. I'm just going to get rid of the ends of these. Alright, so now they're all at the exact same angle. So if I get rid of this, you'll see all those lines are at the exact same angle. And we're going to for a second, and we'll save. And if we go back into Photoshop, there it updated everything again with that same angle that we needed. So again, it's just really, really quick type changes. Another thing you could do, just to get kind of completely wildly anal about this, take the leader line and the label and object group, so Control G. I'm going to group those two, group those two, group those two, and sometimes if I turn this back on but it's locked, I can take these and I can say under the alignment tool, and I'm going to say vertical distribution. It doesn't really matter how. So there's vertical distribution. And then sometimes I like to see if I can, play around with the vertical distribution. In this instance, I can't, so I can get them all evenly spaced. It's not working, and that's okay. Sometimes you can get them so they're all perfectly spaced. But this is so few labels, it doesn't really look bad at all. So again, if we go to Photoshop, oops, get rid of that. External iliac artery, we already changed that. Alright. If we go back to Photoshop and we tell it to update modified content, and it didn't really change anything. Alright, so there you go. If you run into any problems, just drop me an email and I can help you out.